Welcome everybody. Today I'm here with my old and dear friend Richard Roy. We are here, you can see, up in the foothills of the Gray Mountains?
The Green
The
Mountains.
Green Mountains. We're in Massachusetts. I'm going to have an absolute blast having a conversation with Richard, and you're all invited to listen in. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome, everybody. Today I'm in Massachusetts with one of my oldest and dearest friends, Richard Roy. I've known Richard for a long time, and we will get into that. We're at his beautiful home here in western Massachusetts. It's absolutely green and stunning and beautiful. I've already had two amazing conversations with him, and I should have recorded those. But today I'm going to record this one. Uh, and I just, again, welcome everybody, and I really appreciate all the comments and the subscriptions. And I've got a lot of these interviews I have planned. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time, and I got quite a few others, and I really appreciate the feedback. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Richard, for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure.
And, uh, you know, um, a question I'd like, because we've known each other for so long, but people don't know our story. If you would just tell everybody, like, how did we meet? How did you know? How did we have this great good fortune?
Well, I started to study with Master Paul Gallagher in the winter of 1978. And I'd go to class once a week. And that summer, I'm not sure if it was after a class or on the weekend. I'm really not sure. But I remember meeting you. You had come from Boston by bus
Mm.
at Paul's invitation, and um, and then Ken Cohen was also there that same day, and uh, Ken shared with us a short, kind of a pre-staff film
Mm-hmm.
in the front yard of the Blue Main Valley House. And but anyways, that was the first time I met you, and I Paul introduced me to a lot of really great folks. He
Me
was,
too.
yeah,
Me too.
he was surrounded by, he surrounded himself by some really talented folks in terms of martial arts. So. And then the rest is history. And then after that meeting, that's I think it was the following summer, so it would be the summer of '79, that yourself and John Meyerson brought Leon Kai-Chi
Yes.
to
Yep.
teach us Bagua. And I think at that point he was living in Manila,
Yes.
so he would come for the summer, I guess.
He had relatives in New York City, and he would come for the summer and spend a certain amount of time in Boston, a certain amount of time in New York.
Yep. And I remember mostly in that summer on Sunday afternoons in the Rose Garden.
Yes.
Um,
Well, you would bring a group from Greenfield to
although
Boston.
that kind of came a little later on. Um, when I was studying Bagua, I think I was just going out by myself
Yeah.
for that summer. And then as the relationship unfolded, um, I would bring a group of people, and we would bring him out to Greenfield too for some seminars, at least once or twice, I think,
Yep.
if I remember correctly. Um, but those were the days.
They were magical, and like you said, I mean, Paul Gallagher, was he was the axle, the hub that a lot of really, you know, great times, great people, interesting styles, and yeah, I really count my blessings with that one.
Yes.
And meeting you, and just the whole the whole thing. And we had studied with Leon Kai-Chi together, and just really traveled a lot of paths together. And you know. But now for my audience, I mean, see, I have the luxury of knowing you. You have an extensive martial arts background, and if you would just share a little bit of, I know you started with karate first. If you would just give some insights, a little bit about your background, some of the
Okay,
styles,
sure.
some of the teachers, and I think
Sure.
for sure my audience would love to hear some of that.
Yeah, well, uh, my initial foray into Eastern practices was actually Hatha Yoga with a woman named Elifern Poindexter. It was very heavily leaning towards the more meditation aspect of yoga, which I was interested in. And my first martial arts class was actually Aikido with Taitu Uno, who's now deceased, but he was a professor at the time at Smith College, I believe, and was the leader for a UMass Aikido club. And I went for one class. It had a massive impact on me.
Mm.
There were a number of things that I got from I got a transmission from him, and I would say that only because it's still in me after all those years. I remember all the techniques. I remember everything he did in that class. Mainly because at that point in time for me, I was very receptive to it. So it really hit me, very, very deeply. It was the first time I had the unbendable arm explained to me. The difference between making a tense arm and trying to bend it and then just flowing your mind out the fingertips. And that was really amazing to me. His ability to make his body heavy. His ability to fall backwards and then rise back up even against a push. There was a lot of tactile learning that still is kind of inside of me, and that's informed some of my teaching too, in that oftentimes, unless you're able to actually feel it, especially with internal practices, you cannot see it. If it's being done properly, you're not able to see it, but you can feel it. So I didn't continue going to that class. I'm not sure why. I think probably life at that particular time for me. But I was really interested in martial arts. Mainly I was interested in internal arts and meditation. But I had a really close friend, Steve McCabe, Sensei Steve McCabe, who studied in Wisconsin when he was in college, karate. And when he came back, one, he was a professionally trained teacher. So it was different. His method of teaching was such that I only studied karate because of him. And he was very gentle with me, and then I ended up, he ended up retiring from teaching, and I ended up taking over the school sometime in 1978.
What year was it that you started with him?
I started with him in, I guess my first private lessons were in the early 70s, and then I started going to class regularly about late 74, early 75. But that's all I was doing. I was attending all the classes, all the privates, all the, fully immersed. And working towards black belt. I had asked Steve early on if I could, because I had been researching about a Tai Chi teacher. I ended up researching for about 5 years to find Paul. And what Steve told me, he says, it's okay if you study Tai Chi, but you have to make black belt first. So then I poured my heart and soul into that. And when I started with Paul in 78, right after I made black belt in 77, my main goal was to acquire skill and technique to be able to bring into old age. And at that time, old was 40. So I kept kind of pushing it back. But the idea was correct in that, I was still predominantly practicing karate. But I was developing my Tai Chi practice for later on. And one of the things I got from Paul was this 30 to 60, 60 to 90 idea. And he was perfectly good with external training to a certain age.
Yep.
And I was in my mid-20s, I guess, when I started with him. But then after 30, it starts to change a little bit. And then after 60, if you haven't really done the lead up to that, you're going to be scrambling to try to put something together. And frankly, from my experience, I see most people involved in external training. The injuries catch up with them. Their interest in that sort of activity diminishes with age. Not as interested in sparring. And it's mainly due to injury. You just get tired of being injured all the time. So I see a lot of that group kind of falling off martial arts practice. And my idea in the training was to try to develop something, even though I was making a living at it, so that when I did retire, that I'd have something to bring into retirement.
So at one point you're mainly teaching karate, but you're in your private practice. You're now researching internal styles, qigong, meditation.
Well, yeah, I was studying. I was still predominantly practicing and making my living teaching karate and eventually Arnis. But my interest was more in the internal styles. So I was working at that personally, but I wasn't really teaching it per se. I pretty much kept the arts separate, and if I were to go out and study something, I would bring it back and I would introduce it to classes, but I would filter it through that art. So the karate group would get a certain more application-oriented idea of it, and the Tai Chi and Bagua group would get a more internal view of it. And I would just filter it according to the group. And then what I was doing for my own training is I was kind of like a sculptor. I was looking at it from different perspectives, and it actually assisted me greatly. And if I studied on one weekend and then I would do a group of classes, and when I was working full time, I was teaching about 23 a week. So I would have 23 presentations. So by the time I got to the next weekend, I would have ended up doing more work on that material than people that were also at the seminar that had to work all week and didn't even touch it until the next weekend.
Right.
And there's a certain something about proximity to learning something, that if you're going to learn something new, it's fine, but you have to also allow enough space afterwards that you're going to be able to actually assimilate it. Otherwise, if you study it and then now you wait a whole bunch of time, this is where you get some of the, instead of progression in martial arts, there's too much time in between, so it ends up going downhill instead of making progress.
I've had had this experience where I was at a seminar and I'm learning and everything's clicking, and I write in my journal, uh, just move right foot. And then I didn't have like a couple of weeks. I didn't look at that material, and I went, oh, I'm gonna go, and I look at my journal and I go, the key is just move right foot, and I gone,
What right foot?
totally gone. Oh, it's just so simple. Just move your right foot. Without that proximity, like, hey, you got to get right to it, you know.
Yes.
So you learned Tai Chi from Paul Gallagher. What else did you learn from Paul Gallagher?
Well, Paul at that time in the 80s was bringing in a ton of people. So one of the first groups of seminars that I signed up for was with Ken Cohen. Sorry about the mowers who are out here.
They're mowing,
They're mowing.
but they're going.
But Ken did like 5 or 7 days worth of seminars. So my first experience with Bhagwan was actually with Ken Cohen, who was a student at BB Chun. And that's that guard position with the
Yeah, and then
got more of a qigong. And I actually find myself so wanting to do that. So but he did a night of Bagua, he did a night of Shima, and I still remember he did one for a hook punch with a block and a wrap. He probably did something with Shima. I never really studied a lot of Shima. I had the karate right straight stuff. But then Paul also brought in Master Guan.
One side home.
Yeah, and that was like a whole week's worth of seminars, different Qigongs. And of course, Paul in the regular class was, at that time, he was very big on standing meditation. But studying standing meditation with him, I remember I'd go to class at Wu Ming, and there was a wall of windows on that far side. So he would face out towards, the greenery, right? And then it was a small morning class that I was involved with, 4 to 6 people usually. And we'd be in back, and he would just, and I don't know how many of you know about Paul Gallagher, but that man could stand. I'm just saying. He could stand like a tree.
When he said he stood for 45 minutes, that was like an understatement. He's being humble.
So here I am, a new black belt. I could do 1,000 kicks to the bag, and I'm in this standing where, and my legs. I'm paying for this, by the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You signed up for that.
I signed up for it, but there wasn't really a lot of talk about what you were doing. You were just doing it, just trying to kind of follow along. But he would teach standing and a number of the arm positions. I think I also got single leg standing from him, where we go from holding the moon to, I did that again. So I'm still doing that. Privately, I learned the 21 from him, so that I could do it myself. There was a number of Qigongs that, Animal Frolics. He had a massive catalog of information. Being a professional teacher, often those of us that teach professionally have a pretty massive collection of material because you're presenting it to various groups of people, and if you're running a successful school, you would like that student to come back in their second decade. You'd like them to come back in the third decade. So if you're going to do that, then there needs to be enough material to kind of keep it moving forward. Otherwise, if you stop presenting new material, it's going to be very difficult, because then it's strictly on the refining of existing material.
Yeah.
And the refining of material, just FYI, is much more difficult than acquiring new material, because new material is new. Refining material is not new, just out of definition. So then it has to go past the point of, average people might call it boredom, but that is, in my personal opinion, an incorrectly adjusted mental attitude. If you keep looking, and as you refine, there's more and more minutia. It's just the way it is. And then a lot of it doesn't have much bang for the buck, because you can't even see it on the outside.
Yeah.
At least karate, you can, look how high I can kick.
Oh, yeah. Easy to measure it.
Easy to measure.
Yeah. Taiji's a little different.
Well, Taiji's also doing by doing less.
Yeah.
So that sounds good, except for when you're doing less, and it feels like you're doing less. So then it's like, am I doing anything?
So with Paul and meeting Ken, you started to do some Bagua. What other internal
Well, actually,
styles
I
did
didn't
you,
really start. I can't say I took Bagua on from that initial foray.
It was an intro.
It was just an intro, and I had interest in all things internal, basically. So I didn't really start in earnest practicing Bagua till Liang Tai Chi, and then I was practicing it more seriously, which just means regularly. You're regularly approaching. If you're serious about something, if you're a writer, my personal opinion, guess what you do? You write. Somebody says, I'm a bicyclist. Yeah. No, not the bicycle in the closet. Right. It's the bicycle that you're riding.
Yeah.
So it's simply that. But it wasn't until Liang Tai Chi that I started working on that more seriously. Although I was still teaching professionally, so because I was not teaching Bagua, I was not able to do as much of it as I would have if I were actually teaching several classes a week. I don't know if you've transitioned with things that you once taught that you did a pretty good block of time, spent a block of time with, and then when you stop teaching it, it's different, because now you don't have that group to do it with. I don't know.
Well, the other thing I find is that teaching, I would do many more repetitions of stuff than I would practicing. You could do in your own practice, you might do 10 golden roosters every day. But when you're teaching, if you got a couple different people that are learning golden rooster, you might be doing 20 or 30 each class.
Okay, here's the other thing about teaching that's really good. This is an extreme positive in my opinion, is that if you're a teacher of whatever it is, guess what you're doing a lot of? Basics. And you on your own, once you get past a certain point, you practice basics, but they're usually in combinations of other things. Whereas with a beginner, you're isolating it out and you're doing just that practice. And you have the ability, when you're demonstrating it, you're explaining exactly what you're doing out loud. Well, the universe is also hearing that. So you're saying it out loud, but the benefit is way more for the teacher than it is for the student, depending on how receptive the student is.
Yep.
It has to do with receptiveness,
Well, I found that, like say, teaching Taiji or the form or whatever, from all the repetitions of teaching, I could say, where are you at? And they'd be, I'm at high pat on horse. I could go, okay, the next posture is separate right foot. Like, when I practiced on my own, like my Rolodex, my index, a lot of it was like beginning, middle, and end. But when you teach something, you can jump in at any point. And
I I would say only on the forms that you teach.
Yes.
If you don't teach them, you're not going to have that ability.
No.
But I think that one of the things a teacher can do in a class, say for example, I taught children my whole career, and with kids, if you're teaching them a form, and they don't have a personal practice, they're pretty much only going to do it when you're supervising their practice.
Yes.
They cannot go slow enough and start and stop and repeat a sequence enough to be refining. They don't have the ability. They'll lose their place right away. So what a teacher can do, what I used to do for the kids class or adults too, is I would be able to start and stop the form that I'm teaching at any place and develop on the spot a little exercise to just do that part.
Yes.
I come at martial arts as a musician, and if I have a particular problem with, say, the 30-second measure of a page of music, I don't necessarily do the whole page. I just extract that measure out, and I practice that measure. And I think it's the exact same paradigm in martial arts. Otherwise, it's like polishing, the grill of an old Buick with a bunch of bullets on it, and you just go like this. Yeah, well, that's okay, but if you want to bring it to a concourse and win anything, you're going to have to go in there and do each little piece individually. And people will watch me like play drums, and they'll go, "Oh, you just got all that." No, each one of those was earned individually. And then they get put together, and then you think that it's but a lot of times with the more serious groups like my staff, if I was teaching a form, I would develop, before I showed them the sequence of the form, I would develop little exercises for key places, and they would just acquire those, because I think traditionally with forms, everything was already polished, and then it was put together in a sequence.
Yeah.
Not learn the sequence and then see if you can polish it, because the sequence learning is tough. So a lot of times in modern times, people will learn a sequence and then they're able to make it through the sequence without, questioning where they are. That's strictly a starting point. And then the refinement starts. Which, if you look at, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, those of us that I learned some of the forms I practiced, I learned in the 70s. It's like 50 years ago. So the newness of that's long gone. And then the task changes. It has nothing to do with the sequence, although it has everything to do with the sequence. If you sufficiently change how you're thinking about it, even a form you've been doing for 50 years, I don't know about you, but I'll lose my place in the sequence, and I look at that as a success.
Oh yeah.
Because that part of my brain doesn't know it.
Yep. No, I think for beginners, the sequence, they don't need advanced meditation. The sequence is enough. For us who have that sequence secondhand, like we got that little bird dog in our head, we can get a thought, we can go, we can still do the sequence, no problem. The mind is not on it until you trip over something, and then you're like, what single whip am I at? Or,
yeah, it's very easy to get distracted because you know how to drive the standard shift, so you don't have to think about it so much anymore. Which, by the way, is the point. You want it to get to a level where you're not having to think about it so much, and then you substitute other things that you're thinking about, and that's where all the principles come in, and all of that.
Right, that's when you need a meditation technique to stay on task.
Yeah, well, to stay focused.
Yep.
There's a disciplining. I'm fortunate in that I grew up as a drummer, and inside of a drum set playing, there's a massive amount of discipline, because once you learn how to, have some facility on the instrument, you could pop a roll in any place you wanted. It's just, is it serving the music or not? It's a very easy instrument to overplay. Very, very easy. If there's no discipline in it. In martial arts, it's like, yeah, okay, so now you have a level you can defend yourself. But you don't want to overdo that. You have to have discipline inside of it. I know I practiced to hit him 5 more times,
Yep.
but it's not appropriate, Oh, here's my favorite. So you learn to disarm, and you're lucky enough that you do disarm, so now you disarm and then you're going to stick them with it? No, I know, but some people train like that.
No, I know.
They disarm it and they immediately cut the guy. No, that's the discipline that's involved in it. I actually think that discipline in practicing is crucial to the end result. If it's just willy-nilly or on an instrument, I would call it noodling. And it's better than not playing the instrument, but it's not approaching anything that you're having any difficulty with. So what noodling is it stays on the easy, safe side.
Yes.
And it just never. What practice is you're actually, if you're involved in attempting to develop indomitable spirit, which is the deal, you have to be coming up against it. Otherwise, there's no, without much emotional response. Ooh, that's so hard, or ooh, that's this, or ooh, that's boring, or ooh, I don't like that, or just, just able to approach it. And then, like one of my students in Florida, when he sees something that he's doing, instead of adjusting it on the fly, he just stops. And then often when we start trying to interface with ourselves like that, I'll get the response, well, I don't like that. Well, it doesn't really feel good when you're attempting to do something and you find you're unable to do it. And just FYI, as time goes on and you're involved in the refinement and the more minutia, you're going to encounter some things that are very difficult for you. I'm sorry. It's just, I don't know what they're going to be, but I know that they're going to be there. It's just the way it is. The details change, but the actual paradigm doesn't really change very much.
The universal laws.
Universal laws, absolutely.